Hello and welcome to this video, which will explain use of a spreadsheet that has macros that automatically code in the calculations of interest due on a debt. The spreadsheet is available for download through the link in the description below. Okay, so let's go ahead and perform a calculation using the spreadsheet. We'll begin over here on the first tab, which is named Step 1 Input, and this requires specification of the input data for the calculation. So for the first demonstration, I'll just do a simple debt repayment timeline. Say I lent a friend $10,000 and the friend is going to pay me back $400 a month starting on February 15th, 2020 and then continuing every month. I'm not sure how long it's going to take to pay off the loan, but I could just specify a really long list of repayments and then the macro will stop the calculation when the debt is repaid. If I pick the second option in the list box over here, which is go to end of data or to debt paid off, whichever comes first. I'm going to specify that the payments must be applied to interest first as opposed to principal first, and I'm not going to specify any interest at the start. I then will go to the interest tab. We see that the annual interest rate must be specified on the sheet, and in the green zone it's necessary to specify the first day in the period, the annual interest rate, and then the daily interest rate will be calculated in column E. So the way to input interest data is to come to the right hand side over here, on the right hand side of this gray divider line, and then in these data sets, there's space for 10 of them, you enter the different interest regimes that you may want to use in your different calculations. So for example, if I have a 24% interest rate, I can just specify a date well before and well after the period I'm interested in. Then when I click on 24% from the list box and then click copy data to green zone, it'll take over the 24% figures and it'll input where there are going to be changes in interest rate. For example, we know that 2020 is a leap year and 2021 is not a leap year. There needs to be an interest rate change at the beginning of every leap year and every subsequent year. And indeed we can see that the rate in the leap year, the daily rate, is lower than the daily rate in a regular year, and that causes them, the 2 years, to have the same effective annual rate. So I won't specify any compounding, but I'll go to the calculation tab and push the green button to code in the interest calculations. You can see the macro has now run and it's put in my data. We can see the $10,000 change in debt at the start. There's the $400 payments. There's different columns that the macro calculates here, and in all cases you can look at the formula bar to see the formula that's in the particular cell. I'll leave it to you to read through the different columns, but basically what it's done is it stepped through the time period. It's kept applying the $400 payments until it got to December 2022 when it realized it needs only a $392 payment in order to fully pay off the debt. And on the right hand side here we can see the sum of principal plus interest over time. It's diminishing down to 0. So that's really the benefit of using the macro, is that it'll quickly code in for you the various formulas you need to calculate interest, including coding in if statements and VLOOKUP formulas to pull in the data that's needed. And it'll present you with a calculation that's transparent, so it's not a black box that you just got to accept blindly, but rather you can audit yourself the formulas and you can see how it's calculating interest and check that you're satisfied that it's accurate. So we'll run another example. I'll just show you, for example, if there was a previous amount of interest outstanding. Perhaps I didn't actually advance the loan on January 15th, 2020, but maybe I lent the money a bunch of years ago and we just agreed that we'll just charge $2,000 on account of interest at the start, and maybe we'll say that payments will go to principal first. Then I can go back to the calculation tab, assuming I'm going to be, well, let's change the interest as well. So let's say we want to choose a new set of interest data. So I just paused the recording and typed in some data. I said that from January 1st, 2000, the rate will be 2% per annum, and then on June 20th, 2022, it'll step up to 4% per annum, and I typed in the description friends code. I'll now see, friends rate, friends rate is now in the drop-down list. So if I click copy data to green zone, it brings it over, and you can see that up to June 20th, 2022, it's 2% and then it switches to 4%. I go to the calculation, I click the green button to run the calculation. We can now see that we've got our interest at start is $2,000 and we've got our $400 payments again. We'll also see that the annual rate changes to 4% in 2022, and from there on after it goes on at 4%. So in that case there's only a relatively small amount of time that the higher interest rate got charged at. So let's maybe do one more example. I'll come back to the input sheet. I'll click the grey button to clear the data, and then I'll type in a hypothetical judgment, which we will assume doesn't get paid for a long time, and then after many years the judgment debtor decides that he's going to pay and he wants to know how much is owing. So this is how we would do that calculation. So I've entered some data. Let's assume that the judgment was granted on May 5th, 2011 in the amount of $35,000, and let's assume that the pre-judgment interest was $2,450. We'll apply the payments. Well, actually there are no payments, so this is irrelevant. And then we will use today's date for the end date. For interest, I'll use British Columbia Supreme Court post-judgment interest. I'll copy that data over to the green zone. And again, for the interest calculations here, if you're not in British Columbia, you can just delete the data I've got in here and you can put in your own headings and they will then be brought up into this list box over here. But in my case, I'm going to use the British Columbia Supreme Court post-judgment interest rates. I'll then go to the calculation tab and code in the interest again, code in the calculations. The summary here says payments applied to interest first, calculation ends on date calculation performed, which is today, October 7th, 2020, and it confirms the interest rate. So this shows me that the amount outstanding is $47,814.86. And of course, if I'd specified any repayments in the past, those would have been taken into account as well. Then the final functionality I'll show you is this orange strip down button, which basically allows you to delete the instructions from the top of this sheet. And if you want to create a clean standalone sheet, you can say yes to delete all sheets apart from the calculation sheet. It'll prompt you to save. I'll just save it there. And you can see now we've got a one-tab spreadsheet. The only thing it's had to do is it changed the VLOOKUP formulas into straight numeric amounts, because when it deleted the other sheets it could no longer do the VLOOKUP. But apart from that, as we can see from the formula bar, all the formulas are in there. So in summary, this is a spreadsheet that has got programmed macros in it, which allow you to, at the click of a button, run different interest calculation scenarios and save you the time of tediously typing in specific formulas depending on your actual input data. There are 8 points that I'm going to run through which explain the assumptions made by the macro that automatically codes in the interest calculations. The first is that the macro does a stepwise calculation that calculates the interest on the daily outstanding balance of principal over time. So for example, if the yellow represents principal, then on a time period beginning on a Monday, it would calculate the interest, which is shown by the green bar. On the Tuesday, it would calculate the interest for the Tuesday and continue stepping day by day through the particular time period. If the amount of the principal changes, for example, due to an additional advance or due to a repayment, that revised principal amount will be used to calculate the daily interest on subsequent days. So here, for example, we show that the principal doubled in amount on Thursday, and therefore the interest on Thursday was greater. Each change in principal or change in interest rate will trigger a new time period, and the interest in each time period is calculated as the principal at the start of the period times the daily interest rate times the number of days. So for example, we may have a 3-day time period, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That would be treated as one time period with a single interest rate and a single amount of principal. A new time period would begin on Thursday because that's got double the amount of principal. Likewise, if the interest rate changed on Thursday, then again a new time period would start because it doesn't have the same variables as used in the previous time period. The next thing is to clarify that interest rates must be specified as annual rates, and then the macros convert them to effective daily rates by dividing by 365 days in the year, but 366 days in the year on leap years. It's important to understand that leap years are taken into account by starting new time periods on January 1st of leap years and years following leap years, because those are the transition points at which the daily interest rate would change. Because if you take an annual rate and you divide by 365 in a regular year, but you divide by 366 in a leap year, that'll give you different daily interest rates, but the same overall annual rate, which is what you want. Next, I'll just point out that the spreadsheet codes in a new line each time there's an interest rate change. And so if there is an advance or a payment on the same day as an interest rate change, then the spreadsheet will show a line with 0 days. That'll become clear when you see the calculation, but don't worry about that. It's just letting you know that rows with 0 days are sometimes expected in the spreadsheet. If compounding dates are specified, then on those dates, the interest then outstanding is added to principal, and a new time period is commenced that day, with the interest then outstanding set to 0. So here, for example, if we've got 3 days which each had interest accumulating, and Thursday was specified as a compounding day, then those 3 green amounts would be added to the principal, and we can see there's a greater amount of principal on Thursday. Finally, just to confirm that to calculate interest accumulating in the period between 2 dates, including the start date and the end date, the spreadsheet codes in a formula that calculates days as end date minus start date plus 1. The plus 1 is important because, for example, if you consider a period from Monday, March 2nd to Wednesday, March 4th, that would be 3 days. So hopefully you find that useful. Thanks.